Hey guys, welcome back to releasethecraftin. Priscilla here with another episode of Storycraft. And today, since we are still in the month of May, I am still doing viewer requested stories. And this story that I'm doing today is Hans Christian Andersen's The Nightingale. And this was requested probably back in February. So sorry for the delay on that. I forget who requested it, so also sorry for that, but trust, I wrote it down as soon as I saw it, forgot to write down the person's name, but remembered to do it for this month. So here we are, doing Hans Christian Andersen's The Nightingale, and I hope that you guys like this one. I had some feelings about it, which I'll save till the end, but I think it's a really interesting, sweet little story, so I think you guys are going to enjoy it, and if I start to get froggy in the middle of this, just bear with me, because I, nearly choked to dying death on a bowl of Raisin Bran that I scarfed before I started telling you guys this story. And I'm still, feeling it a little bit. My near-death experience. So I'm going to try to tell you guys this story as smoothly as I can. But if my voice starts to go, it's because the Raisin Bran is coming for me. And that's what I get for eating old people cereal. But it's really good. I don't care what anyone fucking says. I love Raisin Bran. Even when it tries to murder me. So, yeah, we're going to jump into it. So we're going to start where all the best stories begin. In the once upon a time, in the way, way long ago, there was an emperor who lived in a beautiful, beautiful crystal palace. And he was constantly surrounded by courtiers and nobles of all kind. And this palace, you guys, I can't stress how beautiful it was. Literally made of crystal. Gleaming everything, gold, jewels, just super lush and extravagant. It also had a very, very beautiful garden, a world famous garden. In fact, the garden was so beautiful that the emperor had them hang silver bells throughout the garden, so that when you passed by, one of the bells would jingle and you would have to stop to take a moment to observe the beauty of the garden and the flower that you just passed. This is how proud they were of this garden, and they deserved it, because the garden was beautiful. The garden is not a character in the story, but it's important for no other reason than it's pretty. And, in addition to having this super lush garden, the emperor pretty much had everything he could have ever wanted or needed, except for the things he didn't know about. He didn't know that he wanted them yet, which is how most things work. You don't know that you want something till you know about it. And the way that the emperor would learn about things is through books. So he would read books that had been sent to him from all over the world with these thrilling stories of things and these tales that people had, of their travels and the stuff that they were experiencing, because the emperor never leaves his palace. And why would you, if you have everything you could ever ask for? Stuff is constantly being delivered to you because you're an emperor, and you have beautiful scenery right outside your window in your super special magical garden. Also, you're surrounded by all these people who adore you and serve you all the time, so why would you leave it? He didn't, and neither did his actual courtiers or the other nobles of the court. So everybody inside of the emperor's palace, not the most worldly, not the most experienced, a little bit closed off from the rest of the world, because they sort of have their own little microclimate developing in that castle. And so essentially, the only way that the emperor would learn about new things and would then acquire the want for new things is through the books and the stories that people would send him. And after reading a couple of these books, he kept hearing these accounts of the beautiful song of the Nightingale, and it would just come up over and over again that the Nightingale had the most beautiful song in the world, and that if you heard it, you would know that it's the most beautiful melody ever been played. And he was just like, what the heck is a nightingale? Also, I want it. That kind of want, not I'd really like to, observe this nightingale. No, I want it. Little tiny whiny selfish baby. I'm not a fan of the emperor. I'm gonna just drop that in here right now. So he gets so obsessed with the Nightingale and all these stories that he's reading about how beautiful the song of the Nightingale is, that he tells his chamberlain and the other courtiers, I want the Nightingale. In fact, I want to hear its song this evening, and it will be brought to me this evening. Whether it exists in our lands or not, you will bring me this Nightingale by the evening, or I will have the entire court trampled. Which, was surprisingly a really big incentive, because the Chamberlain set out to go find the Nightingale and found himself suddenly accompanied by the entire court. All of the courtiers were like, we gotta find this thing that we've never heard of or seen before. We don't know what it sounds like because we've never left the palace. We're probably gonna step outside and get malaria or something. But we don't want to get trampled by the emperor. We're living a pretty good life inside of this palace. So they all followed the Chamberlain into the forest to look for the Nightingale. Remember, nobody knows what it looks like because in all these books, they didn't draw a picture for some reason. And as they're going through the forest, they hear these noises, these various bird calls. They're seeing a lot of really beautiful, brightly feathered birds, and they're like, is that the Nightingale? And they're like, I don't know. I don't think so, because it has a really ugly squawk. And then, they hear a cow mooing in the distance, and is that the Nightingale? And the other courtiers are like, no, you fool. That's not, a beautiful sound. And while they're, tromping through the woods, they've brought their servants with them because of course they're nobles, and one kitchen maid is following along the Chamberlain right behind his elbow, and she's like, that's not the Nightingale, that's a cow, you guys, that's not a Nightingale, that's an owl. And she's just amazed because she, unlike the rest of them, leaves the palace, so she's a bit more worldly, and they don't know anything about anything, so they're really displaying to their staff how foolish they fucking are, because they don't know animals, regular animals. And eventually she gets a little bit fed up, and she's just like, why don't I just show you guys the Nightingale? I know what a Nightingale is. I'll just show you. Would that save us some time? Of you guys guessing that everything we're encountering is a Nightingale? And they were like, we would love it if you showed us. In fact, you probably should have brought that up sooner. But we're desperate, so we're going to overlook this moment where you just chose to withhold knowledge from all us rich, fancy, noble people. So she leads them through the woods to the place where the Nightingale nest. And at first they're a little bit what? That's it? Because the Nightingale, if you've ever seen one, is a very plain grayish, brownish, grayish bird. It's not a very fancy bird. It's a very simple tiny little brown bird, and they're all looking at it and they're just waiting, and the kitchen maid approaches the Nightingale and she says, Nightingale, could you please sing for us? And the Nightingale says, I would be delighted to. So, all the courtiers are just now going on faith, and they get really excited. They bring the Nightingale back to the emperor, who has set up a special golden perch for the Nightingale. And the Nightingale jumps onto the perch and starts to sing. And the song is so beautiful, you guys. It is unlike anything that's ever been heard in the palace before. It's so beautiful that the emperor starts to get a little misty-eyed. He gets some tears in his eyes. And after the Nightingale song is over, he beseeches the Nightingale, please, could you just sing one more song for me, please? And she says, of course, I would be delighted to. So she sings another song. And this time, the emperor doesn't just get teary-eyed. Tears start to roll down his cheek. He is so moved by the beautiful song of the Nightingale. So after the second song, and the emperor is now bawling like a baby, then the Nightingale, is pretty content with her work, and the emperor is like, that was amazing. I love that so much. You don't even understand how much I love that. In fact, I loved it so much that I will give you my golden slipper. So he takes off his golden slipper and he gifts it to the Nightingale, and the Nightingale, who is a bird, looks at the slipper and it says, actually, that shoe is bigger than me, so I'm good. In fact, your tears were more than enough for me. That's all the payment I needed. I'm glad that I could move you to tears with my song. And the emperor is so taken with how modest the Nightingale is that he's like, fantastic. This can't get better for me. from this time on, you will sing for me. And he gives her a fine golden cage to go with her golden perch and all of the best fruits and nuts. So she's really well taken care of. And she's even allowed out of her cage twice a day. Granted, she's allowed out with a retinue of 12 courtiers who all hold a string. So 12 individual pieces of string tied to her leg so that she can't actually fly away, but she can get out and fly around a little bit. So, like, that's really generous of them, right? And the Nightingale lives in this way on her daily walking of the yard twice a day and singing for the emperor every day for about a year. She lives as, quote unquote, a guest of the emperor. And she's sort of given to the position of being the, like, chief executive of singing the emperor to sleep. She gets this fancy title with her new digs and her prison sentence. I mean, her nice room and her luxurious feast. And everything seems to be great for the emperor up until a day where a package arrives for the emperor labeled a nightingale, and when they open it, inside they find a clockwork bird in the shape of a nightingale who, when you wind it, sings a song that's kind of like a mix between the Nightingale song but also like a traditional waltz, and its tail moves up and down as it sings. So it's just a beautiful, like, it's made of gold and has like studded jewels. It's a really beautiful piece of craftsmanship. And they bring it before the emperor, and they have it play its song out. And he's like, wow, that's amazing. I actually really love that. And so they wind it up and had the bird, the wind-up bird, sing another 39 times. They play the song 40 times in a row, which at this point I'm inclined to believe that this is like a rip of Tom Mulaney's What's New Pussycat joke, because 40 times in the row, it's the same dang song. If you don't know that joke, go look it up. It's freaking hilarious. But also, they play it so long, and then the emperor decides, after listening to the same song 40 times in a row, that he would like to hear the nightingale sing against the clockwork bird. And when they go to get the nightingale, they realize that while they had all been distracted with listening to the same song 40 times in a row, I will not get over that, the nightingale took the opportunity to escape, and she flew off back to the forest. And the emperor was disheartened, and the rest of the court were like, what an ungrateful bird! How dare she leave this wonderful place that we were keeping her prisoner in? So the nightingale has left. She goes back home to the woods where she belongs. And the emperor's like, okay, well, I guess I just got this bird. So he gives the bird her title, her cage, all of her things, even though the bird doesn't eat. The clockwork bird gets all of the gifts that had been given to the nightingale. And this carries on for another year. The emperor is listening to his clockwork bird sing every day. In fact, the bird gets played so much, and its song is a lot more easier to replicate, let's say. It's easier to sing and, hum along to than the nightingales, because the nightingale song is bird call, and, this is a waltz. So everybody starts to learn the tune pretty well, so much to the point that, like, they learn the tune, the palace staff learns the tune, and then the palace staff goes out into the world, and they start spreading the tune everywhere so that everyone in the emperor's country knows the song that the clockwork nightingale sings. And it becomes like the national anthem, basically, because this song gets so much play. They never get tired of this song. They love it. And I guess without TV, you gotta have something, right? So this song, a smash hit, top #1 charts. And this goes on for like another year, right? So at the end of that year, while the emperor is lying peacefully in his bed, listening to the clockwork bird sing his favorite song again, its only song again, he hears a twang and a whir, and the clockwork bird breaks. And the emperor is so devastated by this that he takes the bird to his doctor. He takes a clockwork bird to his people doctor. And the doctor's like, bro, I can't do anything. What kind of doctor do you think I am? Like, I treat people. And the emperor's like, forget you then. If you're not going to help fix my companion, I'll go over here. Then he goes to the royal clockmaker, which you think, clockwork bird. Clockmaker might have been your first stop. It wasn't. And the clockmaker is like, I can repair the bird and replace the parts that are broken, but if I do that, then it won't sound the same as it did before. The sound will change, and there's no telling if the sound will be better or worse. But I can, if you want, repair it a little bit and mend some of the damage without affecting the song. But then you won't be able to play it every day like you have been. You'll only be able to play it like maybe once a year, and the sound quality is going to be garbage. It's going to be like you stream this off of like, I don't know, 1G internet. It's going to be the worst. It's going to buffer. And the emperor is like, do what must be done, but don't change the sound of my precious bird. So the clock maker repairs it as best as he can, and they are only able to listen to the song of this clockwork nightingale once a year. And over the course of the next 5 years, getting to only listen to his favorite song once a year, and then it's like really low quality, not a jam anymore type of version, it sends the emperor into a deep depression. He gets so depressed that at the end of the 5 years, he gets super sick, which, like, shout out to his immune system for keeping him alive through depression for 5 years. Like, it made it 5 years, and then it gives out. And he gets so sick that everyone starts to fear that the emperor is not of this earth for very long. He's going to die soon. And the emperor also feels like he's going to die soon. So everyone is like, you know, puttering around the blah, blah, blah. Words are so hard. Is puttering around the palace, trying to come up with ways to cure the emperor of his incurable sadness in the hopes that that will solve the problem, while the emperor is just wasting away all by himself in his room alone because he's gone full emo and is like, leave me alone to die, because he's also the most dramatic person in the history of forever. And while he's in his room alone, he starts to feel this pain in his chest. So when he opens his eyes to see where this like pressure is coming from, he sees that Death himself is seated upon his chest. And Death isn't just sitting there like, hey, what's up? No, Death is sitting there wearing his crown, holding his scepter and his royal sword, looking down at him. And he starts to like panic a little bit because, of course, like who wouldn't? Death is sitting on you. And when he looks around the room starts to get darker and darker. And he's like, this is it. I'm gone for this world. But what happens is in the darkness, these faces start to emerge, and these faces are every, like, good and bad thing the emperor has ever done. They're like personifications of that. Coming through the walls, these floating disembodied faces, and then they start to whisper, and the whispering is insidious, and it's telling him all of his faults, all of his fears, and it's the most malicious whispering from these floating heads, which is a terrifying depiction because he's sitting there with Death, literal Death, sitting on his chest, and all these faces that represent all the good and bad he's ever done in his life are coming around and being like, you suck so much, you are the worst person, you're so goddamn greedy, also you're gonna die. And he's just listening to that, and these whispers are building on top of each other, and they're just building and building and building, and he's like, please, somebody help me, I can't go on like this, make the voices stop. And he turns to the little clockwork nightingale, all broken down on its little golden perch, and he's like, please just sing me a song and make the voices go away. But he can't get up because Death is sitting on his chest, so he can't move. And there's nobody in the room with him because they're all putzing around the castle being like, well, what do we do about the emperor? He's going to die. And there's nobody there to like wind up the bird to sing the song for him. So he's just in the darkness, lamenting, being haunted by his past and all of his doubts and insecurities, when all of a sudden, through all of this noise, a beautiful song is heard. And when he turns his head, he sees from the windowsill the nightingale, the original nightingale, sitting there singing her beautiful melody. And as she sings, the voices start to fade away, and you know, the heads start to like float back into the shadows recede, and so it's just the nightingale and Death and the emperor. And so the Nightingale finishes up her song. The light seems to come back into the room. And Death listens to the entire song. And he's like, please, sweet Nightingale, could you sing us another song? I love that so much. And she's like, I would love to sing another song if you could return the Emperor's sword and scepter. And he said, I would love to. I would gladly do so. So he returns the sword and scepter. And she sings again. Another beautiful, distinct melody of her own. And Death is like, oh, just one more song. Beautiful Nightingale, please. One more song. And she's like, I would be honored to sing for you, but if only you could return the Emperor's crown. And Death says, no problem. I would love to return this crown for one more song. So Death returns the Emperor's crown to him, and the Nightingale sings another song. And he's like, one more, please. Please, sweet Nightingale. And she says, of course. And this one I won't even charge you for. And she sings a song so beautiful, more beautiful than any song she sang before, about the beautiful outside world and all the flowers in it. And this makes Death start to long for his own garden. Because I don't know if you guys know, Death is a gardener. In fact, he has a very lovely garden right outside a church. And he starts to listen to the Nightingale song, and he's like, oh, I need to go to my garden. I need to get out there. I need to get my fingers dirty. I need to be among my flowers. So Death fades away into a mist and flies out the window so he can return home and, water his roses. Death, the gardener. And the Emperor is so relieved. Death is off his chest. He can breathe easy again. He has all of his royal accoutrement back. And he tells the Nightingale, I am so grateful for you. And now that you're back, you can never leave again because I need you desperately. And she's like, whoa, my friend. I also really enjoy singing for you. It is my pleasure to sing for someone who appreciates my song so much. The only problem is my song sounds better in the wild, among the forest and the trees. So here's what I'll do, because I consider you my friend, misguided as you are. I will come every night and I will sing you to sleep. And I will tell you in my song of everything I see in your kingdom throughout the day. I'll tell you about all the people who need your aid, all the poor suffering people who could really use a hand from their super rich emperor who doesn't do shit. I'll tell you about them, but I'll also tell you about all of these awful people that I see who could really use a bit of judgment on your part. Like, if you could just rule your kingdom for fucking once, that would be great. And I'll sing my song for you, my friend. And I'll be really honest about it because you need someone to be honest to you. And the Emperor is very content with this. The Nightingale flies off. She returns to the woods because, of course, she can't make her nest in a castle. It's gotta be in the trees. So she flies off. She has her own little happily ever after out there. The Emperor is so relieved and so content with the idea that the Nightingale will in fact return, that he gets himself dressed. And when the courtiers come in to see if the Emperor died, they're so shook that they see the Emperor is well dressed, and he's like, come on, we got shit to do. He looks better than he's ever looked before. Like, not only did her song cure his sorrow, it cured what ailed him, like, down to the soul. So he's ready to go and maybe do something for frickin' once. And so he goes off to go do Emperor business. The Nightingale goes off to go do Nightingale business, and they stay friends forever and evermore. And they live happily ever after. And that's the end of the story. Now, some of my thoughts about this and some other things. I was really reluctant to do this story because I feel like Hans Christian Andersen, the Danish man, does a little bit of a classical case of the old antique racism, because the story actually takes place in China, and it really plays on a bit of that like mystical Asia trope, and that's a little racist. It's a little racist. So I was a little bit hesitant to do this story because I was like, just because Hans Christian Andersen does a racism doesn't mean I want to do a racism. But then I realized that you could just drop the China part from the story and it works just fine without that part. It's not crucial to the story whatsoever. That's just a random detail he decided to like make a center focal point of the story. But dropped. I think it works perfectly fine, and it gets across the point of the story. Also, I first heard this story in one of Shelley Duvall's fairy tale theater things. I don't know if you guys remember those, or if you ever seen them. They're all on YouTube. You can find them there. If you want to see this one, content warning, because it doesn't just do a little bit of the old classical vintage racism. It does a lot of it, you guys, because Mick Jagger is the emperor, and it takes place in China. There's so much yellowface. There's yellowface everywhere. And it also does play off the mystical Asia trope. So the fairy tale theaters themselves are a delight, and they're definitely worth a watch. It's very wholesome, very enjoyable. Lots of famous people are in them, but just be aware of the time and place that these were shot. It's not the most culturally sensitive bit of broadcasting, but it's not the most culturally insensitive either. It's just, you got some yellow face in there. Kind of little yellow face in your fairy tale theater. So maybe just skip the Nightingale and watch the other ones. They're not nearly as bad. But yeah, that's just where I first heard the story. I actually really love Shelley Duvall's fairy tale theater and watch it often because I just enjoy it as a bit of viewing. But this episode never sat right with me, even when I was a kid. And as an adult, it definitely doesn't sit right with me. So maybe skip this one. I did want to say a little bit about the themes of the story are basically about appreciating what you have, if you love it, let it go kind of things. And also how friendship works best when each party is free to be themselves. Which makes me really genuinely like the story. I think it's a really cute story. It's probably one of the better stories outside of the mystical Asia trope from Hans Christian Andersen, because the man has a lot of deep insecurities that come through in his writing. And so this one was just a little bit of genuine, that's a little happy story where everyone doesn't suffer horribly and somebody kind of learns a lesson about not being a shit person. So I do like the story, and that is what pushed me to finally tell it on my channel. And then just an interesting little bit of thought is that the way that death is sitting on the chest of the emperor really sort of brought me to mind of the origin of the word nightmare, which we all know what night means, but the actual origin of the word mare comes from Old English, and it means a demon or a little goblin type creature that was typically known to ride on the chest of people while they slept. So it would sit on your chest and then ride you via your chest through the night, and this would cause horrible nightmares, visions and dreams, right? There's actually a really famous painting about the nightmare. I think you guys have probably seen it. I forget what it is called and who it's by because I'm not an art historian. But look it up. Just look up nightmare and you will find this painting of this horrible little goblin creature sitting on the chest of this woman who's falling out of bed. She's so distraught. But just the way that the emperor was experiencing this death sitting on him and it causing him terror really put me in mind of this. And it also I guess I should also state the mayor was often thought to be a woman because thanks medieval sexism, right? Or some sort of female crone or hag type figure, because there's nothing worse than an old woman if you were in a man in medieval times. So yeah, they always would be oh, it was an awful old woman sitting on my chest giving me the night terrors. So a little bit of medieval sexism there, but she would do the same thing. So just imagine having a fully grown old woman sitting on your chest, then riding you through the night to give you the nightmares. That's what came up. That's where it came from. But the way that the emperor experiences this with death, it's a really interesting parallel, because it makes me start to wonder if he's really experiencing death actually sitting on his chest being you're gonna die, boy, with all the fears and things coming through from his past, or if he's just having a really complex night terror where he's paralyzed in place, he can't reach the bird, he feels this pressure on him, and then he starts to have night terror visions which tend to be very scary if you've ever had a case of sleep paralysis or night terrors. I have lots of experience with that, so I know that it can be super traumatic. And it makes me wonder if the Nightingale really like wooed death off of him, or if she just like broke up a bad case of sleep paralysis where she was just like, hey, come back to me, dude. I don't know what I think about that. I think maybe there's something there. I think it's an interesting parallel, if anything. I might do like a whole episode in the future on nightmares, because there's a lot of lore there, and I just think it's really interesting. If you're interested in something like that, let me know, because I will prioritize it if I know that there's interest. But yeah, I might do that again in the future. Just, you know, an aside thought train that I went on while doing my research for this story. And again, this is a story by Hans Christian Andersen, so it is available in the public domain. You can just type that into the search bar on Google, and there's a lot of educational websites where the full story is uploaded if you want to read it, because mine's kind of a slightly abridged version, even though it still took me 30 minutes to tell you guys the story. So I'm going to jump off here before it gets any longer. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate your faces. And again, I am doing viewer requests all month long, so if you have a story you want to hear, definitely drop it in the comments down below so that I can do your story. And I will catch you guys all in the next one. Till then, happy crafting. Bye!